So we have our last speaker, and then we have our panel. And our last speaker is Andra Keay, and she's with Silicon Valley Robotics. And I call her kind of the den mother of the robotics scene in Silicon Valley. Please welcome Andra Keay.
Well, that was a heck of an act to follow, and very relevant. And I know you've all got a lot of really important emails you need to answer. So if there is anything that you remember from my, I'm going to make it as short as I can, talk, it's this. There has never been a better time to be a robotics technology startup. Never, ever been a better time for you if you are starting up a robotics technology. The other thing is unicorns are dangerous. So if that's all you hear from my talk today, that's the important thing. If you're a startup, this is the best possible time. Unicorns are dangerous. Okay, why is this the best time for robotics? We've seen the increase in the wave of interest about robotics. From 2012, when Kiva Systems was acquired by Amazon for $775 million, to last year's acquisitions of about 8 robotics companies by Google, to large acquisitions like Mako Surgical by Stryker for billions of dollars. They're broad-reaching public interest in robotics. It's not just because of the investments that are happening and the acquisitions, it's also because robots are starting to be seen in areas of the world and in areas of our life that they haven't previously been. And I think the drone community and the autonomous vehicle or driverless car communities are right at the forefront of seeing this. So this is no surprise to you. But I track the broader public opinion, and we've really seen a shift in the last few years. I'm managing director of Silicon Valley Robotics. Now, this is the non-profit industry group supporting the innovation and commercialization of robotics technologies. And this gives me, from my perspective, the best possible view of what's coming down the highways in robotics. You might get a view that's a little bit up closer, but I love that I'm getting a general introduction to the robotics technologies that are rolling out of research and into the real world. So some of the companies that we have in Silicon Valley area that are engaged in robotics, hopefully many of these names are familiar to you, particularly in this area, but I am always surprised when I discover more new companies or even more old companies that are doing robotics in a whole range of verticals in the Bay Area. And it's the first time I've run across them. It's not just the autonomous vehicle space, it's the industrial and logistics robotics space. And that's, comparatively speaking, that and defense are perhaps the oldest areas of robotics. What is exciting is about the areas beyond that. Health and agriculture are 2 of the largest areas for this technology. So again, people in this room, this is not really a surprise to you. You have seen this wave. And some of these companies have been around for quite a while. So Intuitive Surgical, for example, is one of the largest robotics companies out there. But at the same time, we have many startups. So, well, technically Exobionics isn't really a startup anymore. It's a comparatively new company, but they've already gone public. And Exobionics was in the news today with the rollout of their new exoskeleton for industrial robotics. So the idea is they've been working on an exoskeleton which assists people with spinal damage, paraplegics, to walk. It's being used for rehabilitation, but now they've launched another version of their exoskeleton, which is aimed for factory workers, to support people who are engaged in jobs, say, for example, possibly airframe construction, things that need to have a person doing the job. It can't be a robot, but engage a person in very strenuous changes of position while supporting machinery and tools. There are a number of exoskeleton companies out there. There are several of them in the Bay Area. Just who would know? And what is exciting to me is this trend out from industry into the service areas, and from the service areas towards the consumer space in robotics. Agriculture, definitely, we're seeing a lot of new robotics companies, and perhaps not so new, they've been around for a few years now, but more and more. We're doing an investor forum next week, and there are a few new agricultural robotics startups in that. But what is exciting is that there is an entirely new category of robotics being tracked by the International Federation of Robotics, and that is kiosk robots, retail robots. So these are companies like Fellow Robots and Savioke. And you may have seen them in the news. Fellow Robots have been rolled out at the Orchard Supply hardware store as assistants to the staff. So if you're looking to find out where that rivety thing came from, there may be a robot that can help you find it. Savioke is the butler robot in the Aloft Starwood hotels, but there are much bigger plans than just delivering you your charger to your hotel room. Savioke have got an NSF grant for Eldercare Robotics, and this is an area that we greatly need to be developing technology to assist us. So I've talked too much about some of the robotics companies in Silicon Valley. If you come to the block party, you may have seen many of them. And if there's only one thing you know about Silicon Valley robotics, it probably is the Robot Block Party. This event I'm proud, really proud of. I think it is the jewel in the crown of National Robotics Week. This is the 6th year that we've run it, and the last one was just a couple of weeks ago. We had over 2,000 people come to see more than 40 different robotics groups and companies show off. And this ranges from high school robotics clubs through to advanced research labs, to large companies, to very small startups. It's a selection of just about everything that's happening in robotics, and it's just out. I call it a science fair on steroids, really a celebration of what's happening in robotics. And that's every year during National Robotics Week. That might be the only thing you know about Silicon Valley robotics, but probably our most impactful thing is simply existing and having a central contact and a website. Because with robotics covering so many diverse industries, having a central voice to make connections from the outside world in and in the robotics world across some of those silos is a very, very valuable thing. But that's not all we do. A range of things, and I briefly mentioned we've got an investor forum. We have them every quarter. The next one will be next Wednesday. And as an example of that, we see one of the things that robotics companies and startups needs to get from research to the real world is investment. One of the things that many investors don't actually know what is going on in robotics. We're trying to create the conversation. One of the things we do is not just bring startups in to show, we have speakers. So at our next event, Dr. Rich Mahoney, who's the Director of Robotics at SRI International, will be speaking, as will Dr. Emmett Cunningham, who is a partner at Claris Ventures and is now partnering with Fred Moll's new surgical robotics company. So Fred Moll founded Intuitive Surgical and has now got a stealth startup that's going to be doing magnetically guided laser surgery for the eye, robot surgery. SRI has got exoskeletons, and they've also got magnetically guided microbot factories for manufacturing. So some really cool technologies that are coming, that are starting to be transitioning from research into real companies, possibly faster than you think. That's one of the things at our quarterly investor forums. We do social things. Tonight we're having a network event that is celebrating women in robotics, and we have 5 pretty amazing speakers at that. And the other thing that is fairly new for us is producing reports and studies. So this month we released our first report on, I call it a snapshot of the state of robotics in Silicon Valley, but it's also a look at the broader funding landscape for robotics. We started polling our member companies about 3 years ago, but while it was very interesting for us, it wasn't really in the form of public data. And we wanted to fix that and say, well, what are the things that we're finding interesting and what are some of the trends we're starting to see? So at the end of 2014, we did qualitative interviews with 30 different robotics companies, many of whom were in the drone space, fewer than 1/3, but still that is a sign of a healthy sector of the robotics community. And we asked about opportunities, challenges, drivers, things that were really coming down the pipelines for those companies. And we also looked to put it into a context beyond Silicon Valley and looked at the broader funding data. And we think we're actually in a very good position to be looking at overall funding data, which historically has been plagued with inaccuracies or completely not available. Because not only do we perhaps have a more realistic understanding of what a robotics company is, but we also have a broader perception of where the different robotics companies are. And what I will say is that overall, very positively, there has been more than $1 billion of venture funding into robotics in the last 5 years. And that figure has not previously been reported, but I will say it's a very conservative estimate. I predict that when we repeat this study at the end of 2015, we will find that $2 billion has gone in the last 5 years, and that will partly be because of the increased funding that is happening this year, and it will also be because of even better data collection. And I think that $2 billion, well, to say $1 billion in the last 5 years into robotics is still a very healthy statistic for the industry as a whole. Take it with a grain of salt, though, because the online food ordering industry, which is in very rapid growth, had $1 billion funding in the last year. Okay? Now, that is a very rapid growth online industry. Okay, just cutting through the chase with this, where is this money coming from? Silicon Valley. Okay? We put in more money than the rest of the world, doubled. When we break down the rest of the world, I've split out. There's the Boston and Pittsburgh clusters, and then there's everywhere else. And while this data is largely US-centric, the reality is that venture funding is US-centric. But to date, there has still been this perception that defense robotics, industrial robotics, those hardcore robotics things are still predominantly funded on the East Coast. And this was the case 5 years ago when Kiva was looking for their first round of funding. It was the case when Rodney Brooks was launching Rethink and when Helen Greiner was launching Sci-Fi Works. It is not the case today. Okay? More than twice as much funding compared to the rest of the world happens here. However, that's not the whole story. Why is it the right time to be a robotics startup? Because the amount of early seed stage funding that is out there for you is greater than at any other time, period. And that seed stage funding is not restricted. Seed and Series A, it is not restricted to the Silicon Valley area. If we look at the distribution of the number of deals done, then Silicon Valley is only around about 1/3. What this means is that the bulk of the money is here. The distribution of the deals is more widely spread. And that's actually really good for a healthy growing ecosystem. There are two challenges in there. Okay, what this is saying is that C stage funding, C, not seed, is what's largely happening here. But it's saying that there's an increased focus on companies that are growing very rapidly. If you're not ready to go from small to large very quickly, then your funding stops. It's the hunt for the unicorn. I'm leaping ahead because time is tight. What we're seeing in Silicon Valley at the moment right now is a great big old unicorn hunt. At the end of 2014, it was counted that there were about 82 unicorns, but in the last 3 months alone, there have been 18 more unicorns and decacorns, unicorns valued at more than 10 billion. A unicorn, by definition, is a company receiving venture funding at a valuation of greater than $1 billion. As said, there are now 10, at least, deca-unicorns, companies funded with a valuation of greater than $10 billion. But in the last 3 months alone, 18 companies have received $1 billion funding. Why is this good for robotics? Because if we look back, and the unicorn itself has existed for 20, 30 years, we see them coming in waves of technology. Robotics is not on the chart yet. There has not been a robotics unicorn, but there probably will be soon-ish. Because if we look at the current, this is January 2015 list of the top 10 unicorns, what we see is a rather interesting blend of real-world goods with the addition of the internet and data. And that ultimately is what robotics is all about. We know that robotics is rapidly growing. The factors driving this, I don't think I need to say any more about it, but ROS was stated by 1/3 of our survey companies as being very important. The robot operating system, ROS, very important for their commercialization. That's a significant driver. The fact that everyone now has smartphones, ubiquitous internet, all this is leading us to something that Rodney Brooks described as fast, cheap, and out of control. Okay, and how does this relate to unicorns? Because people keep asking me, so what is Google doing with all those robot companies? And the answer is really, I don't necessarily know, but they don't necessarily know either. Why? Because they're still a comparatively young company. Think about it, if you're still a startup, you are not necessarily fixed on any one business direction. You've got a good run up, but where you go, it's not set in stone. You are not an incumbent. And all of those unicorns out there have got a lot of cash. And there's a lot of potential. I would say don't worry about what Google's doing. Worry about what Xiaomi is doing. Worry about what Uber's doing. Worry about what Snapchat and Pinterest or Palantir is doing. And sure enough, shortly after I started saying that, Uber launched their Advanced Technology Center in Pittsburgh, building robots. So, unicorns are dangerous. Thank you.